This book is a history of the radical left of the 1970s and their attempt to wage war against the United States government. Groups like the Weathermen, later renamed because it was sexist to Weather Underground, the Black Liberation Army, the Cymbalese Liberation Army, the FALN, the Family, and the United Freedom Front. That last group ended in 1984, so this is a long and at times complex story, but always fascinating. By 1970, many radicals thought that the West was heading into a revolutionary age. For the most radical, the main topic was not if, but how to make the revolution a reality. The Black Panthers were the inspiration for most of these groups, and race and racism were the main enemies. Already you can see that these groups were targeting what today the left calls systematic racism, that the United States was a racist, white supremacist country and they were going to save the non-whites of the world. Just like today, the majority that say that are themselves white and generally from well-to-do families. Weathermen, named after a line in the Bob Dylan song Subterranean Homesick Blues, which you might think you've never heard, but you probably have. The film clip is very famous. It's the one where the words are written on big cards, which are then discarded after the line is said. The line in question is, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." To the radicals, the wind was blowing towards revolution. The group started inside SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, which was a Communist Front organisation, but most of its activities were directed against other leftist groups who were regarded as ideologically wrong. In 1968, the people who would go on to lead Weathermen took over control of SDS in a coup. The rest of the organisation broke away and broke apart. They then set about getting rid of those they considered not revolutionary enough. In early 1970, they went underground with the idea of waging a bombing campaign to destroy people's faith in the government. SDS started with around 3,000 people. After the coup, they had around 300. When they went underground, they had around 30 members. Living underground meant not being part of normal society, having a false identity and changing it often. Not contacting family or friends, everything was provided by the movement. In reality, most of the time, they lived in poverty, although not the leadership. They went underground with the idea that revolutionary violence was great, but in 1970 their bomb maker blew up the townhouse he was in, killing himself and 2 other members. The house was the former home of Charles Merrill, who co-founded Merrill Lynch, and the next-door neighbour was Dustin Hoffman. It was owned by one of the members of Weatherman's fathers, who was on holiday and thought only his daughter was staying there. This event changed the course of the movement. From now on, they carried out most of their bombings at night. What I find interesting about all of these groups is that they all had different ideas for waging war, but none of them seem to have read classic revolutionary texts on how to conduct a campaign. There is a long tradition of leftist violence, much of it written about, but they seem to have either not read it or ignored it. A delegation of Weathermen even went to Cuba and spoke to a delegation from North Vietnam. They took the advice of neither the Cubans or the North Vietnamese. They had a series of actions, but no overall strategy. Every action would lead to the next action, but the actions led nowhere. They neglected to have an above-ground support network. Often they were struggling to get money, bomb-making equipment, even food. Their small size and lack of above-ground support meant that they couldn't be penetrated. Security was watertight. In fact, it was too good. Even people who wanted to join or support them couldn't find them. Although the Cymbalese Liberation Army was so desperate for members, they went door-knocking to recruit revolutionaries. And it worked. I would recommend this book as it's full of interesting characters with very bizarre ideas and as a guide to how not to do things.